With less than 2 months to go until the November presidential election, Republicans and Democrats are continuing to differ on how to turn out voters amid the coronavirus pandemic. President Trump has been holding some campaign rallies and mixing some presidential visits with campaign stops. But Democratic nominee Joe Biden has mainly been in his home state of Delaware, with his campaign announcing he will resume travel after Labor Day. He did visit Wisconsin yesterday to meet with Jacob Blake's family and hold a community listening session. New reporting on CBSNews.com breaks down the different strategies, with each party establishing a ground game in key battleground states. For more on this, I want to bring in the authors of the article, CBS News campaign reporter LaCrai Mitchell and CBS News political unit associate producer Sarah Ewall-Wice. Welcome to both of you. LaCrai, let me start with you and with the Republican Party. Some states like Florida have resumed in-person organizing. So tell us when those in-person efforts began and what have those events looked like?
In conversations that I've had with Republicans in a few of the battleground states, it seems that these in-person efforts began again around mid-July, towards the end of July. And so take North Carolina, for example. They've been assembling teams of 2 to 4 volunteers where if they're comfortable with going out and talking in the community, they can do that. They've also been putting together these in-person roundtables every Tuesday with state legislators and business leaders to talk about the impact that the coronavirus has had on those businesses. In Florida, like you mentioned, though, towards the end of July, they began having in-person MAGA meetups. And these are gatherings of about 10 or so people. They've had them in multiple states they've had them in multiple cities across the state. And what I've been told is that in some cases, supporters are so excited to be back that they get to an event and they realize that there's capacity. So they've had to move sometimes the event from being inside to outside in the parking lot. I'll also note that in August, the campaign launched, one of the cities that the campaign launched its bus tour from was Kissimmee, Florida. And at that gathering, you had surrogates like Eric Trump, Corey Lewandowski, and about a dozen or so, dozens of supporters there to support the president.
Okay, so Sarah, tell us about the Democrats. Have they been using in-person campaigning, and what methods are Democrats using to engage voters?
Right. So I've been speaking with Democratic officials across the country as well as the national party. And really, they're keeping most of their events, we're 60 days out, online. They're working virtually. They made this dramatic shift starting in March, as we all know, when the coronavirus really shut down most of the country. And what they've been saying is that they made the investment very early. Starting in 2017, they had invested in places like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania with really building up their teams. So when they went and transferred it all virtually, all those efforts went into phone banking. They have texting campaigns. They've been doing virtual events. And now that we're at the end of this summer season, heading into the final stretch, I'm being told that they are going to keep a lot of that online effort going instead of holding in-person events. Basically, what Democratic officials have told me, kind of mirroring what the former vice president was just saying today in Delaware, this pandemic is not over. There's more work to be done. It is dangerous to be holding these in-person events still. They need to be very cautious with what they're doing. I will say I spoke to some volunteers who've been participating in some of these online organizing efforts in Michigan. They tell me they're not sure if they'd be comfortable knocking on doors. So one of them had actually knocked on doors in past cycles, but they say because of what they're doing online, reaching out to hundreds, if not thousands of voters across this country, as well as millions of voters by text and email and calls, they think that they're reaching people in places they might not have before. And why change it now if it's working and this pandemic continues?
Indeed. All right. So as we've been mentioning earlier, the first ballots are going out today in North Carolina. This, of course, comes as the president told North Carolina voters during a press conference that if they felt that their vote was not getting through, they should show up at the polls and vote again. What is the latest on how North Carolina officials are handling this, LaCrai?
Well, as you mentioned, the president did say during a campaign stop in North Carolina this week that voters should test the mail-in voting system. And he said that they should do that because there should be a system in place where he suggested that voters attempt to vote by mail and in person, which, as you noted, is an illegal act, and it's considered a felony in North Carolina. The North Carolina State Board of Elections promptly put out a statement on this week, and they made it very clear that it is illegal to vote twice in an election. And the statement said that, according to state law, it makes it a Class 1 felony for a voter with intent to commit a fraud to register or vote at more than one precinct. They also noted that attempting to solicit someone to do so is against North Carolina state law. Now, you've had the White House press secretary come out and say that the president does not condone unlawful voting. But I will say, during a virtual press conference that the North Carolina State Board of Elections had yesterday, when asked about this, they kept pointing reporters to the statement that I just read. And also, you know, they are preparing for what is shaping up to be an unprecedented amount of absentee ballot requests that they've received. So as they are warning voters to not vote twice, they're also making sure that they're letting people know that as they are the first state to start sending out these ballots, you know, they're preparing for more than 600,000 absentee ballot request forms that they have already received. And if I could break that down a little bit more, that's 16 times as many of the absentee requests that they'd received at this same time in 2016.
Right. And just bears repeating, voting twice is a fraud and a felony. So, LaCrai, thank you so much for making that clear for us. Sarah, in your piece, you report that Democrats are outpacing Republicans in registering voters in some battleground states. What do these early voter registration totals tell us?
Right. So Democrats, as I mentioned, are mostly working online in virtual capacity through the election. With that said, one of the metrics they are using to see how much they're engaging voters are voter registrations, as well as the vote by mail numbers that LaCrai has mentioned. In terms of voter registration, specifically in a state like Pennsylvania, Democrats have outpaced Republicans in registering voters since 2016. That said, their gap has shrunk slightly. They have about 800,000 more registered voters than Republicans, which was greater during the 2016 election. And we do know that President Trump won the state of Pennsylvania during that election by a small margin. With that said, when you speak to these officials, what they'll tell you is that they're making the greatest gains in some of these important counties in the suburbs. They've really been targeting the suburbs, specifically in Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia. They were really flipping some of those counties in terms of from Republicans to Democrats from 2016. In another state that I've been speaking to officials in, Arizona, they've also been reaching out to voters in the suburbs. One county, Maricopa County, is considered the battleground county of the country. Across Arizona, Republicans still have an advantage in terms of overall registered voters, but the margin has greatly shrunk since 2016. And specifically in Maricopa County, it has shrunk immensely. Of course, that helped Democrats win the Senate race there in 2018, and they're still going strong with their registrations. I should point out that, of course, registered voters does not mean ballots cast. Democrats are very aware of that. They still need to turn out voters, and it really comes down to that when it comes to the election, which is why they're making a consistent effort to make sure voters have a plan to get to the polls or, of course, vote online. And in some of these key battleground states, we're finding Democrats outpace Republicans in terms of requesting those absentee ballots that they can mail in early.
Sarah Ewall-Wice and LaCrai Mitchell, thanks to both of you.